In this video, you're going to learn how to shape bialys, a Jewish specialty that's often completely unavailable in any fresh or edible form. We assume that you've made your dough, that you've let it rise twice, and are now ready to form it, let it rise for a third time before the final shaping and baking. The dough has been risen twice, it's nice and light, and I'm going to just dump it out here on my mat. Now I'm using a roll pat, which is a silicone-coated product, and wonderful for rolling out breads, pastries, almost anything that you'd roll out, because things don't stick to it, so you don't need a lot of flour. Now the technique that I'm going to use for rolling these depends on a surface that is tacky. If you put a lot of flour on the surface, what's going to happen is it's going to roll around and round and round, and you're not going to get a neat little ball. But the first thing we're going to do is to scale out the dough. The dough's a little bit on the soft side, which is fine, but it means we need to be careful that we don't end up with our fingers embedded in dough. Alright, now I'm going to divide it in half. I'm using a plastic scraper because I don't want to damage the roll pad. If you did this on a surface like granite or marble, you could use a regular metal bench scraper. And I'm going to weigh the dough to make sure that I have about half. Alright, let's see. This weighs about 21 ounces. And we're going to make 16. I'm not going to scale out all of them because we don't need to be that precise, but we don't want to be way off base. Alright, and that's about right. So these are good. I'm going to set this back in the bowl to get it out of the way. Let me cover it so it doesn't crust over. Alright, let me turn off my scale because from here on in I'm going to estimate. I'm going to take my dough. This is going to make 8 bialys. I take my scraper, divide it in two, and divide this in two again, and I'm going to divide this in to two again. Alright, this gives me my first 4. Now, we're going to put these shaped bialys on a board for the final rising, and to prevent it from sticking, we're going to flour the board generously. The flour is not going to get worked into the board. The bialys are going to sit on the flour, so we'll be able to easily remove them and put them on a parchment-covered baking sheet for the final baking. Now basically, here's the technique we're going to use. I'm keeping a little flour in my hands because the dough is soft. I curl my fingers around the dough and I rotate it in a circle. What will happen here is that the center drags, so that if you look at the underside, it's completely smooth. And that's 1. If you get good, you can do 2 at a time. And this is also the way you would shape any little round rolls. It's quick and easy. It gives you a very nice shape without any little creases. Alright, that's the first 4. Now we're going to do the next 4. Again, I divide this in half again, and in half again. Alright, speed things up. We're going to do them 2 at a time. See how nice and round they come? Could not be easier or faster. It may take a little time to develop this technique. If you're doing this with a large ball of dough, say you're making a nice round country bread, you would use 2 hands and twirl it around like this. And if you find this is a little difficult, or your hands are really small, or if a child is doing it, you might take your 2 hands, keep it, notice the base is staying on the mat, twisting it around, and what happens is the bottom drags. And you're going to end up with that same nice shape, but it's a little bit easier. Most standard adult hands will have no trouble shaping the bialys. Alright, that's number 8. Right now, we're going to do the second 8 in exactly the same way. We'll take out our dough. Notice I'm not adding any flour to it. If I added flour, it would skitter around, give a much harder time, and end up with a less tender product. So why would you want to do that? Alright, so if it gets a little too sticky, then you can always flour your hands lightly. You're not getting flour on your hands into the dough, which is what toughens it. Any of the wet doughs you might make, if you want to make a ciabatta, for example, any of the doughs that are run very wet and they bake up very crunchy with a nice creamy inside, use this kind of texture dough. It takes a little while to get used to it, but you kind of handle the outside of it and it doesn't embed your fingers. Remember, this is not the final shaping, which will come after these rise. So if it's not perfect, it really doesn't matter. And even if the final product is not perfectly shaped, it will still taste delicious. So we try to make this as even as we can, but we don't really worry about it. It's not exactly like we're going to be serving these to the Queen of England, and even if we were, it would taste so good that she probably wouldn't mind. The name Bialy comes from the town Bialystok in Poland, where it probably originated, although I think they did not use them for sandwiches, according to one book about Bialys. They just slathered butter on and ate them whole. We tend to use them for sandwiches, although they are so good that you may just want to put butter or cream cheese on them and just eat them, especially when we put our little poppy seed and onion topping, but more about that when we do the final shaping. Alright, now look how quick and easy that is. We now have our 16 Bialys resting on our little bed of flour so they won't stick. Now, the only other thing that we need to do is to put plastic on top. Now, if I put plastic on top, it will probably stick. So what I'm going to do is to take some plastic wrap, give it a very light spray with Pam, and put it over. You usually need more than one. You don't want to pack it tightly because you want to give them room to expand. So here is sheet number 2. Give it another light spraying and put it over. Now, we're going to let these rise until they're very light and puffy, and then we're going to do the final shaping. Since today is a chilly day, too cold in my kitchen to let them rise at room temperature, I have my oven set on a proofing cycle of 85 degrees, and I'm going to put this in the oven, and I'll check it in about an hour or so. And when they come out of the oven, we're going to do the final shaping, and they'll be all set for their 15-minute bake, and then ready to eat and enjoy. So come back later for the next installment.